The gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Appreciate that. Our country obviously faces unprecedented challenges and threats on both the domestic and international stage. We were just discussing one of our major threats, of course, globally. We also know that climate catastrophes like the Maui fires, to repelling Russian expansion in the Arctic, to supporting our allies in the Indo-Pacific in the face of Chinese aggression. All of these are absolutely critical to the Coast Guard, to Coast Guard readiness, and to the ability for the Coast Guard to do its job. In a world that's becoming more and more dangerous, our partnerships and alliances keep us strong. Our Coast Guard's presence and operations across the globe are vital to maintaining those friendships. I was mayor of Long Beach, California prior to this. I think I've met some of you before, and obviously work with our Coast Guard very closely. We have one of America's largest ports, and so the work the Coast Guard does there is incredibly important. And the professionalism of the Coast Guard is incredible, so thank you. Obviously, this work is bipartisan, that's really important. We also know, then talking about China, that China is clearly a competitor and someone that our relationship is increasingly complicated. And we also need to recognize at the same time that China is our largest trading partner. It's America's #1 trading partner by far. And our economies are also linked together by trade, particularly coming in through our West Coast ports. We also want to make sure that the Coast Guard has an important relationship to play in that relationship. Mr. Cooper, I want to thank you for being here and your many years of service to the Coast Guard. I wanted to ask, we've recently seen escalations of China's behavior, both on the economic side and on the military side. These actions endanger the economies and livelihoods of the island nations and, of course, threaten our U.S. interests. What can the Coast Guard do, perhaps separately than DOD, that's different to DOD, that maybe DOD can't do, to further our U.S. interests in the region?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the question. The Coast Guard obviously does a lot more than just security, right? They do the environmental response. They also have the ability to project defense operations. They do port, waterway, coastal security. They do aids to navigation. So working with the partners in the Indo-Pacific, their presence there allows them to not only provide training for security, but also search and rescue if needed, as well as environmental response or humanitarian assistance. So it's a multi-pronged capability that the Coast Guard brings to the table.
Thank you, and want to expand on some of the challenges, particularly with China. According to the Illegal and Reported Unregulated Fishing Index, China ranks as the worst offender of all 152 countries worldwide that are tracked. A recent strategic report from the U.S. Coast Guard assessed that illegal fishing has replaced piracy as a leading global maritime security threat. Clearly, we're destroying ocean ecosystems, crippling food chains, threatening sustainable fisheries. Of the 36 nations within the Indo-Pacific region, nearly all are maritime nations, with over 1/3 being smaller island nations. Mr. Cooper, can you walk us through the role that the Coast Guard is playing in supporting these nations and addressing the issue of China's illegal fishing?
Yes, thank you again for the question, Congressman. So the Coast Guard has been very innovative and leaning forward in some of their support to the Indo-Pacific nations, not only with the training. When I was active duty, we would train a lot of those forces on securing their own sovereignty, providing them the capabilities and the capacity to do that. In addition, we work closely with the Navy through the Oceanic Maritime Security Initiative, which focuses on IUU fishing. They've put the additional fast response cutters in region, and then they also have the Indo-Pacific Support Tender, which is out there doing IUU fishing, and they've signed some pretty substantial shipwrighter agreements with 12 of the countries, or 12 of the nations in the region, particularly allowing the Coast Guard to do boardings and enforce IUU fishing infractions in those nations' waters without a shipwrighter present, which is a tremendous capability that they've provided to those countries.
Thank you. And we know, that China has a massive fishing fleet, much larger than any other nation in the world. Illegal behavior around fishing from the Chinese is very common. Our partners like Vietnam and Philippines in the Pacific and smaller island nations, of course, don't have anywhere near the resources or capabilities to secure their own waters. Now, I understand, and we've discussed this here actually at this subcommittee before, that the Coast Guard only has about 5 cutters that are currently operating in the Indo-Pacific region, which spans, of course, 40 million square miles. Mr. Sadler, can you give us some insight onto how an expanded fleet of cutters would actually enable the Coast Guard to both effectively enforce the maritime law, but also safety for mariners and coasties.
Absolutely, thank you. The question is how can you maintain the right presence at the right place in an immense Pacific Ocean, and it comes down to numbers. Coast Guard is long overdue in providing publicly what that force would require, fixed-wing aircraft at places like Canton Island and Kiribati. So you have to also have places as well as ships to do repairs, having repair facilities in, say, American Samoa, and then having those cutters out patrolling our EEZs firstly, and then working and playing, to use a football term, playing man, using collective intelligence gathering and following these dark fleets, and then vectoring in with our allies and partners in the region to watch and to ensure and regulate these largely unregulated distant fishing fleets, Chinese fishing fleets. And things like the Pacific Quad with France, New Zealand, and Australia, long-standing, is a venue for doing that. And then also, as already mentioned by Captain Cooper, using shipwriters and actually having virtual call-in to the justice, the equivalent of the justice departments in these island nations to effect arrests and then to transfer those people to their own shoreside justice system. So there's a lot that we can do. There's little examples of it, but to really get it to the scale that's meaningful against the threat, we have to get more cutters into the theater.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'm going to have a second round of questioning.